Today, it's our sheer pleasure to have the editorial team of the Organization Studies with us. Organization Studies aims to promote the understanding of organizations, organizing, and organized. As scholars, not only do we admire the high-quality work published in Organization Studies, but we also hope and desire to publish in it. And that is what today's session is going to help us with. So I'm sure we all are excited to hear the brilliant team of Organization Studies. You may ask your question at any point during the session, but please make sure that you type your question using the Q&A function and not the chat function. If you look at the bottom of your screen on Zoom, there are two ways in which you can participate. We'll encourage you to use Q&A function and not the chat function to ask your question. And we'll pass on all your questions to the panelists. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming the fantastic team, the editor-in-chief of Organization Studies, Daniel, and senior editors, Peter and Marianna. A very warm welcome, Peter, Marianna, and Daniel. Over to you all. Thank you.
Thank you for these introductory words. I will leave us on screen like this for a while before we switch over to a short presentation, but it's lovely to be here, wherever here is for all of you. Welcome to the session. Thank you to the CMS InTouch team, Alex and others, for inviting us to this series that we happily accepted and wanted to join. Obviously, my name is Daniel Hjorth. I'm the editor-in-chief of Organization Studies. And I have with me a fantastic small group of people. Marianna Fotaki from Warwick Business School, University of Warwick in the UK. In this context, also welcome Marianna, a senior editor for several years at Organization Studies. And Peter Fleming, professor at University of Technology, Sydney, Australia. I'm not sure whether Peter is joining us from Australia, but it's decent times anyway, I assume, if that is the case. Peter is also since several years a senior editor at Organization Studies. And I have worked with these people in that capacity over these years, and I can assure you they are brilliant editors and of course fascinating to read, and they write well. So there are many reasons that they are part of this session. We will touch upon publishing in Organization Studies, but I wanted to bring the discussion into a bit more perhaps and hopefully interesting discussion of what critical work is today, what it is to us, and how we can reason about critical work going forward. There are, of course, as for any journal, but also for Organization Studies, who wants to be about things that happen, people that work in and between societies of today. There is always reasons to update, revise, and reinvent and critique critical work as such. And I will try to challenge and perhaps, if possible, provoke a bit these eminent scholars to join me in that conversation and try to figure out with you. And we will also land this a bit in the question of publishing work in Organization Studies. I will start by then give the word to Marianna and Peter just briefly to say hello, because that it gives us a bit more human touch and interaction before I open up the short slide deck to bring you through some points. Marianna, please.
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to talk about critical thinking, how to think about thinking, and how to think critically about thinking. Thank you very much, everyone. I'm very much looking forward.
Hi there, everyone. It's Peter Fleming here. Really looking forward to today's session on critical thinking and discussing themes around that topic. It's I'm happy to be here and good to see everyone here today. And it is actually 9:15, I think, my time.
Right. Very good. Thank you very much. So I will share the screen and see if this collaborates with us. Anyone can give a shout if this is not displayed properly. So that should be organization studies. Just received. The impact factor is important for some people, which is now 6.306. Of course, a seductively precise number, which is simply for arithmetic reasons, I assume. We publish 12 issues per year, so it's a big journal in that sense. As an editor-in-chief, I'm happily handling some 950 submissions per year. We are two of us. That's the principal of this journal. So Renate Meyer is also co-editor-in-chief together with me. We have 2 years overlap, 4 years term for each editor-in-chief. And we publish together with EGOS, the European Group of Organizational Studies, and the publisher is Sage. So it is a broad journal that was said already in the opening presentation of us. We focus on organizations organized in and between societies, as I stressed. In addition, it's important, I think, to say that organization studies is a journal that is anchored, rooted in social sciences broadly. We would say today social sciences and humanities even. We have a lot of work in the journal over the years, 42 years now. We had an anniversary not too long ago, drawing on both philosophy and art and literature, history and so on. So that multidisciplinary conversations are very important to the journal, how the journal progresses organizational research, diversity, comparative and open to paradigmatic pluralities. Having said that, the journal is predominantly publishing qualitative research in terms of empirical methods used, but is open to any kind of approach, quantitative or qualitative. So I wanted to take the opportunity also to reason, to discuss together with Marianna and Peter, and there are many ways to approach the topic of critical work, critical thinking, critical research, and many of us have been dealing with critical work from several perspectives too. It could be historical materialism, it could be the Marxist tradition, could be labor process theory, could be Foucauldian research, post-structuralism, feminism, and so on and so forth. I've chosen to use Michel Foucault's work a bit here as a teaser, as a starter, and use that to get to warm up our discussion. So Foucault wrote, and many of you have seen this, and also perhaps Judith Butler's discussion of that piece, where he ties into the tradition going back to Kant and Enlightenment. What is Enlightenment? Foucault asked what is critique and what is enlightenment today, so to speak. And he says that, well, one definition of critique is the art of not being governed quite so much. We could start already here, I think, to ask this question to ourselves: what would that mean today? Thinking about the perhaps most common roles or forms of subjectivity that we act in or are provided, citizens, employees, and consumers. What would it mean to not be quite so much governed today? Marianna, would you like to address this broad way of defining critique?
Okay, thank you very much, Peter. That is a very apt quote, I would say, especially during the times of the pandemic, where our lives, at least in the West or Northern Atlantic, and the antipodes to as well, are actually defined so much by minutiae and massive abrogation of our rights as we knew them only 2 years ago, that even Foucault wouldn't have dreamed in his darkest moments about the governmentality and biopolitics entering literally every vestige of our life. So that's a very apt question, and that's also a question that's relevant in at least two ways. How we as scholars, who are, most of us at least, are paid by public funds, how we contribute and what do we do? How do we use our speaking space to contribute to this profound and rapidly unfolding changes, pivotal changes in society? So I think, so on the one hand, as citizens, how do we actually act? That's one aspect of reflecting on that very quote, but also like as scholars who spend their time on reading, writing, thinking in particular. Thinking, whenever I think about critical work, it is actually, about thinking, improving the thinking and bringing new thinking. That would be my definition of critical work. So what do we do? What is our role? And Foucault himself, quite controversially, was not only a great theoretician and historian, in fact, but he was also an activist. He took part in support of Iranian revolution, quite controversially it turned out. So what is our role? I say, if we want to be governed less, or quite not so much, to use Foucauldian frame that you have proposed, what would that mean? Would that mean to actually launch a critique that would be accessible not just to scholars, not just meandering vague ideas, arcane vocabulary, etc., but to launch a critique that would speak to people who experience the things as we do experience them, and also who are disproportionately disadvantaged in how they experience the governmentality of the present. That would be one thing, but also, would that be sufficient is my question. Do we need to go beyond that? Do we need actually to become activists so we are not governed quite so much as Foucault would have had it? Thank you.
So,
that would
thank
be my
you. Yes, and Peter, are there forms to be activist as a critical scholar today? What means do we have in terms of writing and publishing and in terms of our teaching? What do we say? Can we become active, or are we bound to comment from the sidelines, so to speak?
Well, that's a very good question, and it's one that's being asked more and more, I think, in the academy. There's no doubt about it that the institutional pressures that have developed in the neoliberal university over the last few years have made it more and more difficult to speak out about our own institution and our own labor process, which is an important thing to keep in mind as a profession. And it's a tricky topic, because we certainly want to write and publish critical work that is going to make a difference, because otherwise otherwise, why do it? However, I think we have to be careful to not fall into the trap of having this kind of impact agenda placed upon us, where we have to create research in an instrumental manner, which is, of course, as we know, as part of the neoliberal parlance as well. I still think there are spaces of freedom in our occupation, and as critical management scholars, we certainly have a lot of opportunities to do that. But I think that there is a feeling within the community that things are slowly changing. For example, what was happening at Leicester University, that we've all kind of watched aghast with critical management scholars being targeted in particular. So certainly tricky times at the moment. Yeah. But there is hope.
There's hope, yeah. And if we look into the next quote, I stay with Foucault and talk about the answers that we search for in terms of what critique is today. So Foucault says, well, a successful critique would somehow ensure the desubjugation of the subject in the context of what he calls then the politics of truth. I think this is interesting still, and has been perhaps renewed in the most recent context of should we say attacks against truth, or certainly academic knowledge as a source of truth, but also the renewal of the immense receptivity to quite fantastic stories that try to explain this and that in the world, not least in the world of politics. And here, of course, one would see the work of a critical scholar to be partly about publishing for the right reasons, as Peter said, but perhaps also as an educator. Is there a role of trying to ensure the desubjugation of graduates when they leave our business schools in the future? And can you say something about how being a critical scholar matter in this regard, Marianna?
Yes, so thank you very much, Daniel. I think we have to start with the first question. Why are we in academia? And Freud, you talked about different critical approaches, but psychoanalysis is a very important frame that helps us in the project of desubjugation, though Foucault was not really fond of psychoanalysis, but that doesn't matter. Freud was wrong too. Foucault could be wrong on that as well. I think he was wrong, but in any case, so why are we actually in academia? And Freud said that being totally honest with oneself is a very good starting point. And I would agree with that. So especially for us who have been in this, how can I put it, in this trajectory of years. And I will be very honest with you, trying to live to Freud's maxim. I will be very honest that when I joined academia 20 years ago, at a mature age already, I think things were so much more easier for me and than they are for junior scholars, never mind our students. And I think the more we are in this field, we have, how can I say, a duty of care, I call it, a duty of care towards our junior scholars. Okay, I still want to say a few things, fewer and fewer, but I think that my bigger role is actually to pave the way and make this possible for the incoming scholars, and particularly for our students. And in that way, I fully agree with Peter that we live in a neoliberal wasteland, especially when one looks at it from the perspective of the UK and Anglo-Saxon world. We live in a neoliberal wasteland, indeed, but therefore, because our graduates flock to the management and business schools because they want to have a decent shot at the job market, that's our space that we can occupy to actually inculcate the values and attitude and give them tools for critical thinking, and promote and protect the space for critical thinking. And by critical thinking, I think, apart from honesty, which is the first step on an individual level, I also think that we need to cultivate curiosity and courage. I think these are very important, attitudes that, and this, the best way of cultivating that is by serving as an example, serving as a role model indeed. And I'm not trying to actually say that one should live up to unattainable ideals, but one has to have a courage of convictions, and one has to use one's, as a senior academic, one's minute power, and that's really minute power indeed, to actually carve spaces for junior scholars and students to pursue their own important, meaningful things for themselves. Yes, so we have to put ourselves on the line a little bit as well, vis-a-vis the management, and also as by actually taking risks ourselves a little bit. Only in that way can we actually convince our students that a critical work that is curious, that will question the given assumptions, and that will actually have the courage to, yes, fight for the unfinished social project for the better world, that the next generation is going just to live in that dystopian world that is being so that we can actually, through our both actions, teaching and scholarship, but also to how we behave vis-a-vis the university management, that we can just show them that another way is possible, and it's worth fighting for one's conviction, even if one fails.
All right, and so I bring I keep sort of pushing here, and so bring this over to Peter and say that so Foucault says that when you have an adequate idea of your knowledge, if you know the limits, but I guess also if you know what knowledge is doing with and through you as you use it, you can perhaps approach the question of autonomy or liberty again. Yeah. So he ties our capacity for freedom, if we take that big word in our hand, or autonomy in some sense, he relates that to knowing your knowledge, so to speak. So it says one approach to critique, to understand the assumptions at work while you know, while you progress on applying your knowledge in most cases for the scenario of the graduate, for example. So is there room for that in the business school today? You think to spend time working with learning to know our knowledge, and therefore secure or make possible a way to approach the question of autonomy or liberty? What do you say, Peter?
Well, that's a big question as well. Well, I guess I'm in two minds, you know. Once again, in the speed university, trying to be a slow professor and thinking about these important questions and reading and so forth is becoming more and more difficult to do, given all of the KPIs and so forth, you know, the managerialism that Marianna rightly pointed to. And I think that, you know, criticality is perhaps one of the first victims of those pressures. On the other hand, I've been struck by the remarkable resilience, I think, of critical thinking in the business school. And one of the rewards of that is to see students being turned on to thinking about their own circumstances and realizing that they do have autonomy. I'm not too sure if I would go so far as to say that knowledge is everything. You know, I think I'm a bit more of a materialist than a Foucauldian on that in that regard. And Foucault always called himself a neo-Kantian, right?
Right.
that knowledge is enough to give one's self autonomy. I think if you're born into a particular class, you know, of which Foucault was part of, and if you know, an academic and so forth, then that might be the case. But I think we need one step more for real autonomy, and you'd be pushing me to define what I mean by real autonomy. But I think that autonomy, to a certain, we've had this what we could call a faux or pseudo autonomy foisted on us, you know, by the idea of the market. Yeah. And that a pseudo autonomy is part of the problem. You know, you can see that in the university student body saying, well, I'll choose this university rather than another, you know, competition and so forth. So in principle, I like the idea of autonomy and knowledge leading to autonomy, but I think there are certain problems that we might want to keep in mind as we analyze that.
We have, of course, historically the idea that the university as an institution would itself guarantee a form of autonomy vis-a-vis society, or that it would represent some kind of, if not safe haven, so at least it should be allowed to independently set its agenda and not deliver pre-specified pieces of knowledge or supply graduates of a certain kind and style to society, so that the autonomy of the institution as such would be part of this. And if we bring it down a bit, of course, not being governed quite so much is perhaps a good formulation of an ambition in terms of autonomy that we could still relate to. And certainly find reasons to fight for. Is the future of the business school in particular a problem here you see in terms of that autonomy or not being governed so much being at stake and threatened? Marianna, what would you say? The business school is particularly in a bad spot compared to the university, if we put it like that?
Yes and no, Daniel. And I'm taken very much by that Foucauldian knowledge power nexus. I think I don't agree with everything on Foucault, but that one I agree with, and with Foucault. And I think the key in this quote you put, its limits. And that's what I'm taken by, because I think that the type of knowledge we produce, the knowledge that's privileged, the knowledge that is actually, you know, reflected in ranking, in journals, in what counts as frameworks that are worthy us reproducing, however meaningless this might be. This is, well, to use a more kind of Gramscian approach, this is an ideology at work. And I'm also, you know, sharing with Peter my materialist orientation, because we must not forget that actually the list of knowledge and what how workings of ideology is not evenly distributed. Everybody is, of course, capable of that, but it's not evenly distributed between different societal groups, but also groups within the same societies. In that sense, as I said already, you know, because business and management schools as money earners occupy such a central position in modern universities, in many modern universities. Somebody used this quote, I don't know who that is, but I really like it, said that, and the person said that the business schools are what religious departments were in medieval ages, the most important actually faculties in the university for good and bad reasons. I want to stay, the bad reasons we know why, but I want to stay with the good reasons. As I have said before, and as Peter said, and you did say, Daniel, the resilience of critical thought and the spark in the eyes of our students. When I mention, for example, you know, well, even Foucault, never mind feminist philosophy, or critical race theory, indeed, and people say, oh my God, I never thought about it that way. And that's actually what I think I can, that's very minute, of course, and that's very modest, but living that and practicing that and giving tools so they take and run with it and do their own thing with it. I think that's the opportunity that the business school presents us with. Even if our courses of business ethics or our, I don't know, industrial relations or whatever that might be, or gender, are very peripheral, and they are peripheral, but still we can occupy that space to actually do the most out of it. And yes, and
yeah,
and that's our role, basically.
yeah. I think this leaps. We start to talk more about writing and doing research, critical research, and publish such. So, and everyone attending, you've seen the method here. I sort of impose quotes and ideas on Marianna and Peter and ask them to respond. And it's moved now from Foucault to Nietzsche and his famous metamorphosis that you could say provides another way of, and in typically aphoristic terms, framing what critique is in critical work. And so he has this micro story of a camel that as a scholar you often you try to become an erudite. You load yourself up, you pack yourself full, you have a heavy burden, you go out into the desert, and you're the one that knows everything and should have knowledge as your library, as your archive. And this leads up to the roaring no, the critique resistance of the lion. We have to also, having become camels, we have to become lions. And then Nietzsche characteristically sort of hesitates and say, however, the most beautiful of all is perhaps to be able to become a child and find ways to say yes. And he describes that as the sacred yes, the affirmative becoming that allows inventions and new possibilities. And this is, of course, a way to look at this more hopefully. And we have touched upon how this critical work as a scholar, as a person, can be part of who you are and what you do. And we have perhaps been closer to tactics or minor practices or children's play, if we want, or small wins as a source of turning things around. And I think it was a beautiful way of approaching this, Marianna, when you say that the business schools might be particularly targeted here, but also a very important and perhaps even the most important educational institution at the moment, not only quantitatively because it educates a lot of people, young people, but also because it sits on this possibility also to transform societies in this complex and beautiful economy, sociality interaction that on which business schools in many ways sort of operates. In terms of doing critical research, what is your what do you think is important for the young people now trying to become better critical scholars in terms of doing this work and perhaps then relating to Nietzsche's teaser here? What are these relationships, you think, in your own writing? Is there a way to be a critical scholar? Is it a problem that there are strong, let's call it dogmas in critical thinking too? Although there are, as we have said, many ways of being critical, it might also be something that is a challenge to young career folks that aspire to this. Should we be more relaxed about that? What do you think is characteristic for good critical research? Is it are you looking for the right references in the reference list, or how do you think this, Peter?
I think that first of all, to engage in critical research, one has to be, Marianne, you used the word courage in your earlier statement. And I think that's right. There has to be courage to do this research that may not be valorized by the, if you want to say, the dominant institutions, you know, the Dallas list, for example, of US American journals. If you want to publish in those journals, then it's going to be very difficult for you, and you can see young scholars deciding not to and going for something that's going to be more amenable. So careerism is something that you have to be very tricky, and you have to be very careful with, because before you know it, if you follow that strict careerist path, you're doing stuff that you're not really interested in. It's simply to move up the hierarchy. Now, we all have to do that to a certain extent because we work in bureaucratic institutions and that's how they function. But I think that we need to be very cautious about how much of that careerism frames of what we do. And when it comes to doing critical research, you know, I always have in my mind when I'm writing critical research is that, you know, the objective of critique is to render critique redundant, so you don't have to do it anymore. It can't be a style, it can't be an investment in identity, a fashion. You know, the object, because it's so difficult, you know, we're doing it so that we no longer have to critique something, and that there is a place where certain power relations might be dismantled, and that we would no longer have to write critically about it. And I think that's important to keep in mind as well, because otherwise it becomes too stylistic expression, and I've always been worried about that. Because it becomes kind of like an identity, which is important to a certain extent, but I don't think that's the point of critique. So I try and keep that in my mind when I'm writing.
So we, of course, for me, it's okay that I say that organization studies aspires to become not only be, but also in the future maintain its capacity to publish work that this is pulled from our website, journal that publishes studies of organization and society that can also change how we see the world, and by implication change the world. Yeah, and I think that might be it's a bold, it's a courageous aspiration, but nevertheless very, very important, because it as we said in the opening, the society keep throwing us reasons for reinventing what critique is, and critical work is, and critical research is. If we can't really come up with innovations that show what it could be today, I think that is a danger. And of course, in any such aspiration, dogma or too strong or stable identities would prevent that kind of curiosity and inventiveness on behalf of young and new scholars in particular. Critical work, if we're backing out a bit to become slightly more dogmatic, is typically described as being critical of established institutionalized orders, relations of domination, of course, knowledge as such, and how knowledge is used in also formulating critique. But with Nietzsche in our back here, we'd also see that it's not only against something, but also searches for ways of being for something that can add to necessary change. And I have, of course, omitted here the psychoanalytical tradition that Marianna reminded me of in an open list of let's say dominant modes of being critical, or schools of being critical, that all could draw on these various sources. There are excellent publications, maybe in our field in particular. I've just listed Burrell and Morgan's 79, Alverson Wilmot from 92, and then summarized in the Oxford University Press Handbook from 2011. For those of you who want to have a bit of a trajectory of this in let's call it business school research. So we have addressed several of these questions. What critical research is today. If we look at the second question here, what role critical theory play today? What would you say? Are we seeing renewal to critical theory? Is theory, building theory or theorizing an important enough ambition today in the world of getting published sooner than later and as quick as possible? Does this require patience, you think, that we have, or what is your sense about this as we go forward? Marianna.
Yeah, so I just wanted to say that, being critical is really about, I like this Nietzschean metaphor. I mean, being critical is thinking about thinking, really, and assessing that thinking with a view to change it. And that can never finish, because we are also unique and inventive. And also, as you said, Daniel, because, life throws so many challenges all the time at us. So being critical is a synonymous of doing research for me. I can't imagine how you can do uncritical research. Unfortunately, it's enough to look at pages of many, kind of established outlets to realize how it can look like. But I think looking at one of the audience, I think maybe focusing on our role as senior scholars and particularly as editors, right? What can we do actually to promote that criticality, so that uniqueness, inventiveness, and the challenges that are thrown at us, but which are unequally distributed across the globe and within our societies? How do we have actually, how people who face those challenges and may not be so well versed in the canon, which is an ideological canon. Knowledge is power, as Foucault would have said, and it serves the ruling class, as Silvia Federici would have said, right? So if that's the case, and surely as critical scholars we will agree with that, then what can we do to open that space? I think more work, basically, more nurturing, Daniel, I think. So if we want to have theory from outside the kind of coming from outside the usual channels, even the established channels, and become new canons, and it becomes really boring and counterproductive, we really have to actually make that effort and just get to know frames that are even outside of our critical tradition in the West, right? And people from the South, CMS scholars from the South, they not only face different reference frames, they face the language barrier, they face the kind of, even the type of issues somehow feels less valid and less important. Judith Butler had it, which is to do with whose lives really matter and whose actually problems are more important than other people's problems. So as editors, we really have a role to play to actually spend more time, even if it takes 3 major revisions, and that's not what we aim for. But sometimes, or many times, I would say, it may be worth it actually if the payoff will be to actually have a voice that normally is not heard, and actually a theory that doesn't normally enter, even doesn't figure in the pages of critical journal as organizational studies is. So yeah, that would be my take on it, Daniel.
Thank you. And there's slightly more editorial perspective here. I have 3 questions. Does this affect what you study, how you analyze, and how you write? Peter was touching upon this before. It's It's challenging and it's hard work, of course, but is there, from your perspective as senior editors also, and when you get a paper maybe sent on to you from me and say, look into this, Peter, it looks interesting, but you have the better pair of eyes, would you say this could be taken into review process? What are you looking for in critical work today, or yeah, let's start there.
I look for serious scholarships, so that I think the operative word there is study, you know. So I think that before any plausible critique can be put to paper, we have to study, and study is still something, you know, we did it as students, and I still think we do it now, and that we have to be careful to cultivate that space of study. But I want to see evidence of that in the paper, and that they've taken their topic very seriously, and that it's not just going through the motions, etc., but also tapping into an important issue that I think is relevant. Close scrutiny of theory, if you like, or previous research, and trying to address an important issue that is relevant not only to academics but beyond academia, I think, is important as well. Again, not in that kind of crass impact kind of
right.
discourse, but that it has some sort of public value. Right. And I think that's important. So they're the main things, that it's serious. Yeah, that it's serious. And I'm not saying that there's not serious papers out there, but that there is a drive at the heart of it that is really engaged scholarship, and that it's tapping into an important, even controversial issue that has public importance.
Is it important that you get a sense of that the research is part of society?
I think to a certain extent, definitely. But I wouldn't take that too far. I think that, for example, there's great historical papers that I've looked at and loved, you know, and that may not necessarily be as relevant to 2021, but it's serious his organizational history scholarship. But I think when it comes to criticality, I think that it does tend to be addressing something that is of public concern, and that we are in a unique and privileged position to a certain extent to spend time thinking and writing about it, and hopefully giving a voice to a different opinion. I think theory is really important because, you know, the old Marxian adage that, you know, the point is not to theorize, but to change the world. And I think we need mental models, right, and frameworks in order to provide alternatives in this narrowing ideological horizon that we find ourselves in. And I think that we're really lucky to be able to kind of have the time, to a certain extent, although it's rapidly diminishing, unfortunately, to discuss and to think about these ideas in a serious way.
Right. So I think that's encouraging and challenging us all to become more inventive, if you like, more creative and of course creative and critical are really neighbors in many ways in terms of doing doing such research. We open up. We have some 10 minutes for questions. I thank Marianna and Peter for a lovely discussion. I utterly enjoyed this, and we're happy to take questions for 10 minutes or so.
So you should be able to see the questions and the
yes,
and the
in the answer. Let's see.
Yeah, so it's number one.
Can I read the first one. Fleming, Peter, I assume you mentioned how there is a feeling that things are changing in the academy, suggesting there is more space for CMS scholar activist type of work. I welcome another, if you have, well, sorry, there was the parenthesis of a long acronym. But my more important question is, what is triggering triggering this change? Did you understand the question, Peter, or was I messing?
I think so. I think so. I'm not too sure. Yeah. Well, maybe it's more than a description of what's happening, more of what I would like to happen, more of a normative statement, perhaps, rather than a descriptive one. You know, it's tough to do critical research up to a certain point in the university today. So I think that you know, universities are becoming antagonistic institutions. They probably always have been, but particularly so now. And after the pandemic, you know, the gloves have come off to a certain extent, and I think that that's kind of, you know, woken us up a little bit about the nature of the institution we're in and the stakes that we want to fight for, and what we need to do to be able to have that space to study. And so am I optimistic about the future? Of course I'm not. You know, if you've read anything I've written, but I would like to think that we're not going to give up just like that. And academia is traditionally a very conservative profession. And most of us don't like speaking out that much, etc., etc. But I think there's a sea change given the way in which this managerialism has become quite overt, and we realise what the stakes are.
I think for those of you who don't know Peter that well, I think it's one of the most positive pessimists. One of the most optimistic pessimists I know. So I think that's a good. Living paradox, to put it like that. So that was a question from Isabel Beidag. We have one from Guy Huber who says, Marianna, how might we turn strategies of oppression in the business school into strategies for change?
Well, I hope you would ask me that question. Yeah, because I think that's the most important thing. And I want to say, Daniel, just building from the previous one and what Peter said about value of theory. So Kurt Lewin said that there's nothing more practical than a good theory. And if you look at how theories of Judith Butler have changed, even Pope referred critically to Judith Butler, the Pope Benedict. So you know, I mean, the power of theory is not just a performative power, but the power of Marx's theories capture the imaginations and continue to capture the imagination of millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of people, even if they get distorted in the way. But what I'm trying to say, so I think really creating that theory, but also just kind of
we lost Marianna.
Them into critical thinking and passing our critical thinking to students, really. So our strength lies in actually propagating the world, practicing it, and you know, cultivating it, really, I would say.
There is a question from Penelope, I think, I guess to all of us, but she's asking advice for an African scholar pursuing Africa-centric research beyond the traditional. She mentions what she thinks is perhaps something that has gained success in organization studies, CSI, entrepreneurship. Well, so this is, it seemed to me, a broad question, but of course, critical African scholarship is, I have to say, something that we are looking very much for in the journal. We are struggling with a history and tradition that means we are dominated, so to speak, by submissions from Europe and North America and the UK and Australia. So Asia and South America and Africa, we receive less work, but of course the same criteria is applied for wherever it comes from. Good work is good work, and I think there is plenty, of course, to empirically plenty to write about as a critical scholar in the African context. This is a very wide statement to refer to a whole continent, but I think maybe in this question too is that there might be hard to find the supervisory inspiration or colleagues. It might not be so common that people do critical work at your home department or institution. But I think I haven't met any, senior serious scholar that is not interested in helping out or being in contact in this sense. So I think you will find all of our senior editors, for example, be happily coaching and supporting you in the work of learning this hard trade of doing good critical scholarship, writing good papers. So you're welcome to call on us in this respect. Yes, more questions. Have I missed? Or we are 1 minute to our deadline.
We've got a couple of questions come in here. So if you want to just look at the answered part of the Q&A, Daniel, you should be able to see some if you scroll down.
Yeah. So from Yazaman Sadeghi, are there any telltale signs for showing that you're not just going through the motions? Are there specific things that can signal, I guess it should be, the potential and the seriousness of the author to you? How should we understand that question? You mean that we, if we're merely playing or pretending to be critical?
I think that might have been with reference to something I said, Daniel, about when I get a paper, or when you send it on a paper to me, what am I looking for in critical research? And one of the things is serious scholarship. And I don't think it's something, it signals itself, I think. I don't think there are any instrumental signals that you can send. It just signals itself that this is serious work and that there's been a lot of thought going into it and a lot of reflection and being up to date with the literature and doing something interesting with it, rather than repeating what has already been said.
Yeah.
Daniel, can I just add other word on that? I think that honesty, when you write honestly, the writing becomes ever more so powerful. You can just see that. I'm not saying that it should be poorly written, but when you write really honestly, well, the writing is better, and it really gets the reader actually to sit up. If I can say so.
And I scrolled past a question here from Nuzeku Nyati. It says, I struggle over the years to have my work published because I touched on issues of race in organizations, but am encouraged that the time seems right now to embark on this project with interest in decolonization to post-colonial, for example. What strategies or advice would you offer to embarking on this kind of project? Yeah. Would you like to start, Marianna, or?
Yeah. I think that, genuinely speaking, that that has been that issue, very important, crucial issue, has been neglected for a bit of a shameful history have in management, if I may just be so self-critical here, not necessarily about myself, but about our field. And I think without addressing the issues of coloniality, we cannot speak about knowledge power, we cannot speak about inequality, discrepancy, we cannot speak about poverty, migration, we cannot speak about capitalism, we just can't speak about any of those things. So finally, there seems to be a very long delayed opening. So please do contact us, especially myself. I always have more time for works from Africa, Indonesia, and non-Western countries. I always have more time. But anyway, yeah.
Okay. What sayest thou, noble hearts? Time-wise, are we at our limit? Do we have questions unanswered here?
We have 2 more questions unanswered. So if I maybe very quickly ask them.
Yes,
so it says, Peter, you're suggesting that here that we should start with theory and then go into social practice, but surely that would be imposing what we already know. What we already know, however, leans towards the colonial European way of thinking. Surely we don't want to keep imposing this onto the real world. Surely we should start by being in the real world and build theory up from the bottom. And if so, what can the relationship be between academic, the real world, and those on the ground, i.e. those engrossed in social transformation on the ground, the grassroots activists? So a really meaty question to end with there, I think.
Yeah, no, it's a good question, and well, I think we've got to be dialectical about it. I think that theory and activism have to be closely linked. Whenever someone says university versus the real world, I wonder, I pinch myself, am I real? And I think I am. And so the real world is in the university as much as anywhere else. And indeed, the university is at the vanguard of the marketization of our society. And so it's no longer this bastion free from all of those things that we talk about happening to other people. But yes, I definitely see your point, you know, that others engaged in social activism definitely should be kind of keying into their new theoretical frames. I don't think theorizing is imposing what we already know, though there is a lot of Eurocentric theorizing, and I totally agree with you there, but I don't think in and of itself it needs to be imposing what we already know and assumptions and so forth, because reflection by its own definition is about usurping those ingrained assumptions. But I also wouldn't be a fan of what Theodore Adorno called actionism, where it's action for its own sake, you know, because that's just as problematic for all of the reasons that we know. But yeah, no, I definitely see your point. I think it's a good observation.
Thank you.
Great, and for that we'll hand back to our host Vijeta.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Marianna, and thank you for listening, everyone.
Thank you, everyone, for your questions.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the fantastic session, Daniel, Marianna, and Peter. It was really great to see so much of encouragement for critical work, and it was really wonderful the way panel engaged and reflected deeply about what critical may mean for academics as business school educators as well as scholars. I'm sure many of us would like to engage more with the journal as authors and reviewers. Many thanks to all the attendees for an enthusiastic participation and great questions. With that, we come to the end of the webinar, and we would like to draw your attention to our forthcoming events. I would also like to thank the CMS InTouch team members behind the scenes, Kat, Arturo, Alex, Ozan, for their tremendous support. So if you see, in September, we have our next event in this series, Publishing Critical Work in Qualitative Research in Organizations and Management. And in October, we have Publishing Critical Work in Culture and Organization. We would encourage you to write to us in case you want to run your own webinar. Please do write to us on this email ID, cmswebinars@gmail.com. If you subscribe to our Eventbrite page, you'll be able to get our notifications for upcoming events. And in case you missed any of our event or you want to revisit any of the webinars, please do follow a CMS InTouch YouTube channel. And we are there on LinkedIn as well as Twitter. You can join us there as well. So thank you so much. Take care. That's all for now. Bye-bye. Thank you.